Welcome all of you, and thanks for joining us tonight for this tonight in the UK, in the morning in New Zealand. Delighted you can join us for this webinar on using remote and online environments in your coaching. My name is Dr. Matt Smith, and I'm actually supporting my colleagues Chris Seslak and Blake Bennett, and we're guest editing a special issue of the International Sports Coaching Journal. And the special issue is on the topic of exploring coaching delivery in an online digital environment. So when COVID-19 hit and we all had to adapt our coaching practices to adapt and work in an online environment, and there were some good things about that, but there were certainly some challenges. And it was very much Chris Seslak's idea to have a special issue in the journal where we tried to pull together publications, research, ideas, to look at best practice of working in an online environment, see what we can share as practitioners. And alongside that, we decided to have this webinar to coincide with the upcoming submission deadline for the special issue. So we're really pleased that so many of you could join us today. We've got four speakers, and the way we're going to do this is each person involved is going to do a brief presentation. And if you've got questions for them, if you can put them in the chat. And so Chris Cushion from Loughborough, Chris Seslak from Hartbury, Sergio from Leeds Beckett, and Blake from Auckland are each going to do around about 5 minutes. And they're going to present on an area to do with online coaching. And then we'll have a couple of minutes for questions for each of them. And then we'll finish with a panel discussion where you can ask general questions. Maybe we can share some more good practice and then aim to finish in an hour's time. So I'm going to start by handing over to Professor Chris Cushion from Loughborough University for his short presentation.
You want to stop sharing your screen, good man. There you go. Hello, everybody. Just let me share my screen with you. So my 5 minutes are going to be focused on basically two things. So the first will be an overview really of a paper that I published in 2019, which was a systematic review of technology enhanced learning in coaching. And the second half will be about a project that I've been working on over the last couple of years with a major governing body in the UK. I'm not going to say who it is, but you'll probably be able to guess. They put about 20,000 learners a year through their coach education and coach development. Pre-pandemic, they were blended and some online learning. And then during the pandemic, obviously everything went online. And our role in that was try to assess the impact and understand how they could make that delivery a little bit more effective. So the first piece will be about the review. The first thing to say about the review really is it's really hard to do a systematic review on technology enhanced learning in coaching because there's so little research that actually does it. So the review focused on the research that was in coaching but spread out into physical education and then into education. So the research base is pretty weak, and it would be fair to say that in this space related to coaching there wasn't a huge amount, or there isn't a huge amount of knowledge on how to do this. The studies that did exist or do exist demonstrate effects, so people learn from it, whether it's developing reflection or whether there are other learning outcomes. These things are generally successful in a technology enhanced environment, but it isn't necessarily related to the technologies themselves. So it's more about the pedagogical structure, and a nice quote from Hugh and Cheng there. Technology is not a silver bullet and will not independently or autonomously improve learning performance. So there is something else that's involved. And the last point really from the review, essentially, it's about thinking about the learner journey and the learning design. So we talk in higher education about constructive alignment. So the learning outcomes, the content, how we deliver it has to be really, really important. And I think at times we get a little bit bamboozled by the fact that we're online or there's technology involved. So there needs to be clear alignment. So that's really a summation of the literature review. On to the second half around the research piece. So essentially, based in the literature, we looked at what makes effective CPD, what makes effective online learning environments, and created some a kind of a rubric for learning principles, and they were around structure and organization. So you can read these for yourselves. Some of them appear more than once. So, for example, we'll see as they come through. So there are things to consider when creating a learning environment if it's going to be online. So how the stuff is delivered, how it's connected, what structures are in place for collaboration, how this connects to what people already know, how do we get people to buy in, or how do we impact that want and need, and what are people going to be asked to do while they're engaging in this learning. The second is around content. Again, you'll see some of these things appear more than once. How much content are we going to deliver? How are we going to bring that to life? How are we going to make things connect together for the learners in terms of learning capacity? And how does this piece of learning connect to other pieces of learning in terms of context and the bigger picture? And lastly, in terms of learning outcomes, are they set up out front? Do we know what people are going to get from it? Are their mastery expectations communicated? Are people able to use that material immediately or in their practice? Is it a call for action? Again, we talk about learning capacity, and does it create a structured collaborative learning environment for people to work in? So you've got some general principles that are evidence informed about how you might want to think about designing and developing learning environments using technology. Interesting, the study was very hit and miss. So some materials hit some of the learning principles. Nobody particularly nailed it. So people were strong in some areas and weaker in others, or in different types of output. What was really, really clear from the research is that people were completely focused in on content first. They were thinking about what people needed to be given and weren't really thinking about the learning, the principles beside it. So based on that research and recommendations, basically, number one, plan for and prioritize learning. So think about what are we trying to get here in terms of a learning outcome. Develop a strategy grounded in these learning principles. So once you've got some content, or if you're looking to review content, can you map against the learning principles and understand that not everything can hit all of the principles, but I'm going to focus in on, for example, collaboration. How do I structure this environment to build collaboration? And something that came out of the research was people need to be trained to do it. There is a training need. So it's all very well just picking up your in-person or your blended or whatever it is and dumping it all online. But the training need just came out loud and clear, and ensure that people are connected to the principles and think about these learning environments they're designing. So discussion points: how do you operationalize these recommendations or these principles? Very often it can be used as a filtering process or a mechanism to review before content goes live. So you can think about, I've designed this, now let's sense check it against the principles. Thinking about how we build learner capacity. Now what I mean by that is that what I do today was impacted by what I did yesterday, and what I do today is going to impact what I do tomorrow in terms of my capacity. So how do we know, how do we help coaches and learners engage in that online environment and build their capacity to be able to do it? And lastly, how do things fit together? So learning is a process, it's not an episode, it happens over time. So how do we structure our environments and our learning to do that? So connect it to a bigger picture. And this comes to, we called them buckets. There were buckets of content. So we're thinking about how do the different buckets fit to each other horizontally. So how does one thing need to another in terms of level, but across to other buckets, and how is it interconnected with the learning principles in mind? That, I think, will be me. And I will stop sharing.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. I'm just waiting to see if there's any questions in the chat, but while I do, I'll just ask you to reflect on a couple of things that occurred to me. Your online learning principles that you presented, the main meaty slide, it sort of occurred to me that was a summary of just really good coaching practice generally, And I was just wondering your reflections of how much of that is new, or how much of it is just a reinforcement of what is really, really core good coaching practice.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Matt. And it's a combination of evidence informed practice from learning and from coaching. So how do we create a positive learning environment for people we're working with, but also the linking that to online delivery. So there's an educational space that are doing online delivery. So it is an amalgamation of stuff that perhaps we already know that are evidence informed, but isn't stuff we necessarily do. There's a difference between, taking learning online and online learning. So picking up a load of stuff and just dumping it into a Zoom call with a PowerPoint is not online learning. I'm sorry, everybody, we're not doing online learning tonight, are we? This is not it. We've just moved stuff into an online space. So there's a very, very, very different way to structure things. But it's the same from the review. The systematic review showed that it was the pedagogical principles underpinning this stuff that makes it effective. So like I say, we get a bit blindsided or bamboozled by the fact that we're in an online environment or there's technology, and that becomes the focus, when it's still about how we design the learning environment and how we draw on pretty well-worn and well-known principles or evidence-informed principles.
Thank you. And I'll ask you another very quick one about one of the specific points. You say about learner activity and how active a learner's asked to be. Just wonder what your thoughts are on how much you give autonomy, or give the option for learners to be active. What's your thoughts on that precise point?
Well, I think there's, people, there has to be an element of learner rehearsal. So people need to take the thing and have some kind of rehearsal with it. Obviously, in an online environment, when it's live like this, it's very, very difficult to practice because we're sitting in our living rooms or in an office, aren't we? It's very difficult to practice. But I think there's an element of learner rehearsal that can be involved. And there are things like pair and share. There are things like questioning and discussion. There are things that you can do that make the learners active. I mean, I think you can be, it's very dangerous to think people sitting and listening are somehow passive, but if you give them cognitive tasks and things to do, that, it doesn't have to be physically active. I think it's about being cognitively active. So pair and share, problem solving, how would you apply this in your environment? What does that look like? So getting people to be active in that sense rather than physically active, and planning it. So it's not just sitting and passively, stop, right, let's think about a task now.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. We'll come back to you in the panel discussion at the end, and I'm going to hand over to Chris Seslak for his presentation.
There we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit.
Chris.
Can you see it? All good? Yeah.
All good.
Fantastic. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a project that a research that we did with British Sailing. And we are going to be exploring how applied practitioners effectively connect with athletes in online environments. Just to give you a bit of background. So basically what British Sailing did in the first lockdown during March and June 2020, they put all of their provisions online, and they called it Sail from Home. And so what they did during the week online is they had every day, they had different workouts and different interactions from all of the different practitioners. And there were synchronous and asynchronous resources that then maybe put online for the athletes to access. So they had something like a workout Wednesday, where an S&C coach might have like a session with them together. They might have a Turbo Tuesday where the physiologist is there. They might have a Tech Thursday where some of their technical coaches will work with them on some areas. So that's the way they outlined that. And I looked at all of this and I thought, well, it'd be useful to find out what they did that worked in this project, because it was subsequently nominated for an award, I think, and so it had an impact on the athletes. So what we thought, we looked at the perception of what, concerning effective athlete-centered online delivery, because that was one of their key aims, was to be athlete-centered and to bring us further forward. How psychosocial behaviors maybe enhance connections. So how the practitioners still be able to maybe demonstrate psychosocial behaviors that enhance the connection with the athlete. How this connection might impact on the development of the athlete. I'm not going to go too much into these method slides, but we had 11 full-time practitioners. These were elite coaches. They were elite technical coaches from the Olympic classes, and 18 full-time funded athletes. Some of them were just about to go to the Olympics and couldn't, which was subsequently postponed. We did semi-structured interviews. We asked the practitioners first, and the athletes second. And what we did, we looked at the practitioners' data, thematically analyzed it, and used some of those responses that we had to inform our discussion with the athletes. Just a quick one, our phrasing around the procedure was guided by appreciated inquiry, which looked at basically effective applied delivery. What is effective? What is good delivery? What is best practice? And that's what we were trying to gain out of this research project. I just presenting this as a results slide. It is not actually as linear as you might see it on this results slide, but you have a lot of psychosocial behavior that the practitioners have demonstrated through the in and online environment. But the key part here is that it enhanced connectivity, and that's what the practitioners said, that they wanted to be able to connect or feel connected still with their athletes. I'm going to point a few out and give you a few stories behind these. For example, they will make sure that they were, displaying care and empathy by being readily available. I mean, that might be also context driven, because at this stage they were at home, but they would say, look, I'm aware, I'm just a phone call away, I'm just a Teams call away. Athletes perceive that it strengthens the relationship with them, and they were still feeling connected with them and close to their coaches and close to their practitioners. One thing that's actually was quite useful, quite nice, and this is quite remind me a little bit about some of what Chris just mentioned. Yes, it was about content, but it was also about expressing commitment, and they were actually also participating. So they tend to participate in the sessions, and the athletes enjoyed that because they felt that the coach is demonstrating what is supposed to be happening, and something that they actually haven't done with the coaches before. And often they would say, do you know what, I've never worked out with my coach before, or I've never actually had like an online game or simulator where I could work against my coach. And that developed kind of like a reciprocal commitment from them. And then there was a promoting holistic mindset, which the coaches were doing at this stage, which helped. And that's not, it was using the online environment as a mechanism to be able to promote this holistic mindset at this stage where they were at. Obviously, it's very contextual based at this stage as well. We know that athletes live in a performance environment. They want to perform, and they can't perform, their world normally falls apart. We were seeing that coaches trying to counteract that by promoting a more of a holistic mindset of saying, okay, well, you need to enjoy what you're doing right now at the moment, spend some time with the family, do something different, develop yourself as a person through this, and help to cope with stress. So one of the applied considerations, we looked at a theory called the connectivism theory, which kind of underlines this research a little tiny bit, which is a theory of networks connecting people and resources influenced by technology and socialization. It includes diversity, autonomy of participants, openness, connectivity between online approaches. So some of them is, I think one thing is to consider is that online environment, I think Christian was also mentioned it, is a mechanism. It's to express, and they use it as a mechanism to express psychosocial behaviors. It could, when you look at our results, they're closer look at the frameworks of JOWT 3+1, fairly much fit into that as well. So we developed some of these different elements as well, and developed the relationship. So coaches can use the online environment to develop a relationship. There's an impact on the athlete holistic development. So again, using online environment as a mechanism, coaches were able to do that. It also allowed practitioners to display different parts of their identity beyond focusing on performance. So they could be seen in their private environment without maybe be seen in their private environment. But lastly, I think, which is quite important to understand, when working through an environment, it magnifies the existing culture. So whatever there is, whatever focus there is in the coaching culture there has been before, that will be used as a mechanism to magnify that. So if it's an athlete-centered coaching culture, then that's going to be magnified through what the coaches do through the online environment with a mechanism. Thank you very much. And that would be me.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just waiting to see if there's any questions in the chat for you on your presentation, or if indeed any of the other presenters have got any questions for you. Maybe people can have a think about some of the messages in your presentation about what practitioners did in an online environment. Ask us at the end in the panel discussion.
Chris, may I ask a question there?
Yes, Sergio, please do.
Yeah, so just because I did a lot of online coaching during the lockdowns as well. How did you get a sense from the coaches how much planning they put into their sessions compared to how much planning they would put into the sessions normally?
Yes, I did, and in actual fact, they did say they had to do an awful lot more planning for these sessions than they would have to do for an in-person session. But when kind of like talking to them a little bit more about that they said it probably was more to do with the fact that they were not aware of how to use the environment or how to use the online environment, rather than, as I said, if I would probably do as much planning, or I would have done as much planning for the sessions that I deliver in person when I look back on it. But now they're coming to the online environment and they just didn't know how to plan it. And there are simple things like how to build rapport, or how to kind of like get the interactions going. It's different online than it is in person. So they had to kind of think about these things a little bit more, and program them in a little bit more. So there was a lot more programming going on, Sergio. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
No worries.
Perfect. And Sergio, I think while you're there, I think we'll pass on to you for your presentation.
You've teed me up really well. So I think my presentation will resonate a lot with some of the things that we've been discussing already. So basically, I'm gonna talk about a paper that we are writing at the moment, titled "The Coach Developer as a Learning Designer," and it's really based around the experience of developing as a coach developer, developing online learning for the iCoach Kids program. So first thing I'm going to do very quickly is for those of you that don't know what iCoach Kids is, give you a quick introduction. iCoach Kids started as a small Erasmus project, but over the last 5 years, it's grown into a little bit of a global movement with a following from over 80 countries, and now doing things beyond what was the original project. In terms of what we have at the moment, especially related to online learning, we have a website, icoachkids.org, which we are still working on. We're having some teething issues at the moment with the website, but it's available and it's ready. So I would encourage you to sign up and help us to keep improving it. We have a YouTube channel with over 300 videos, instructional videos, keynotes from our conferences. We have 3,500 subscribers at the moment, and we've gone over 200,000 views, which is not really Kardashian territory, but we're very proud because it means that 200,000 times someone has sat down to watch our videos, which is quite something. And then the main topic for today is the idea of we developed 3 online courses, 3 MOOCs, massive open online courses over the last 2 years, We're now developing another 2 that we've just done the filming for them. And I wanted to give you the paper is all about describing the experience of us as coach developers with no experience of developing e-learning, having to do this really. And we did it before the pandemic. We didn't know the pandemic was coming, but it was we were ready when it came in a way. Like I say, we developed three courses. First one is developing effective environments for children in sport. Course 2 is child-centered coaching and physical literacy. And course 3, coaching children, planning, doing, and reviewing. Now, the first thing that I wanted to kind of share with you is what's learning design, really, in general terms, not only online, really. And as you can see there from these 2 courses that I'm going to show you, it's about the creative and deliberate act of devising practices, plans of activity, resources, and tools aimed, as Chris was saying, achieving specific educational aims in a particular context, okay? And that's what we were trying to do. But that means that the learning designer is not just creating content. You're really having to structure that content and think about the learner's engagement with that content and how they're going to use that content and what that content is going to mean for them and whether that content is going to lead to any behavior change and how. Okay, so that was we were thinking about all of this before developing the e-learning really. The purpose of the study was twofold, really. On the one hand, we wanted to, having gone through the experience of developing these courses, articulate the development and the decision-making process, because we really couldn't find a lot of this when we were looking for ideas to how to develop this, especially in coach education, because we wanted to make explicit all those processes to hopefully help people in the future that are going to do this. And the second thing was we wanted to then understand, okay, so we talk about coach developers all the time, and we know that coach developers now, we've gone from thinking about the coach developer as someone that stands in front of a class to deliver a lecture to someone that can do a number of different things, okay? One of those being learning design. So we wanted to see what skills were required from a coach developer to be a competent learning designer. The paper follows a dual narrative, okay? On the one hand, the narrative one is really making explicit every decision we made in every development phase. And the 4 phases were agreeing the learning outcomes, choosing the pedagogical model, selecting the technology providers, and then the 4th one, developing the content. But then the second narrative of the paper, oops, sorry, let me just go back there, is around really what all these, as we were going through all of this, what did we learn as coach developers? What was the key learning points at each phase for every decision? And let me tell you that we didn't get everything right. And when Chris said before that no one has nailed it, we definitely didn't nail it. Okay, and hopefully we're trying to make amends in the next 2 MOOCs. We've changed some things. So in terms of the skills that we identified, we move on to the findings of the skills. The idea of being able to translate, okay, from all kinds of reference documents. We had a coaching children curriculum. We had the International Sport Coaching Framework. So using all of that to come up with something that we felt was suitable for this kind of learning. Obviously, we needed some kind of subject matter expertise to be able to develop it. We needed a huge amount of synthesis because by definition, and I think Chris mentioned this as well, you have to keep the learning to short bursts. So we had to really be able to synthesize things and be able to zoom in and zoom out constantly to keep things really simple and really tidy. We also had to be able to plan with flexibility because we didn't know what we were doing, basically. So we had to be very flexible in terms of when something didn't work, just change it. And when we went into production, if you want, filming the first time, we spent 7 days filming. I think I slept 3 hours every day because we were so unprepared. Okay, we made so many mistakes really that we had to fix from one day to the next. Rewriting scripts, for example, that sounds really good on paper, but when you say them in front of a camera, it's terrible. We also had to learn a lot to negotiate and build relationships with the providers, the production company, the people that build the MOOCs. which we weren't expecting to do. We just didn't plan for that. We had to be able to communicate very clearly what we wanted to these people, the developers. And we had to develop a new skill, writing for the screen and presenting, which I will always now have a lot of respect for, even for the weatherman, just standing in front of a green screen and telling people what's going to happen tomorrow, because it's something that, again, we hadn't really prepared for, and it was a bit of a shock to the system. And just be very patient and very humble, because doing something that you've never done before, you're gonna make some silly mistakes. And that's it. That was in a nutshell what we went through. I'm more than happy to chat later or answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergio. That's really good. Thank you for that. Any questions from anybody in the chats? I think Sean's not asked a question. I think he's more made a comment, Sergio, in the chat, I think. Oh, no, does Sean work with you?
Sean, much appreciated. I think that Sean is paying us a compliment, which I'm really pleased about. Yeah, we had to do a lot of work on that. If you saw the first piece of filming that we did, it was like watching paint dry. We had to. I did about 20 takes for the first video. It was like a very bad movie.
So can you maybe just on that, Sergio, maybe you can give us just a little insight into a couple of the things you did that moved from the paint drying to what Sean's saying about the really engaging, maybe a couple of key lessons there.
Yeah, so for example, you just have to really imagine that you're not speaking to a camera. You have to imagine the people behind the camera, the people watching this, and just be getting that mood of, I'm teaching, I'm coaching, I'm not speaking to a camera, I'm not reading a script, because you follow. We didn't learn them by heart. We followed an auto cue, a teleprompter, and we just had to get into the habit of not pretending, because you truly are speaking to people. People are going to watch this, and that took some adjusting to, really. So it didn't look like you were just reading something. That was one thing, really, that. And not feel silly doing it, just feeling like it's the right thing to do, because we felt very self-conscious, really, at the beginning.
So there's a bit of mind trickery there of convincing yourself both you're actually talking to a live audience and getting over the not feeling silly about it. Thanks. I'm sure we'll come back, Sergio, to lessons learned when we do the panel discussion at the end. So thanks very much for that. And we'll pass on to Blake.
Great, just checking you can see the full screen there.
Yep, all good.
Yep.
Let's go. Can't see my cheat sheet, that's good. Right, kia ora koutou, ko Blake Bennett toku ingoa. It's great to have you all here. I'm going to be capping off the presentations this morning with a little piece that I did on remote coaching and kendo. So as I go through, I'll explain what that is and then sort of get into the guts of the study from there. But before I started, I thought it's probably fair just to give you all a little bit of a short clip of what kendo is for a couple of reasons. One, I make the assumption that not many people know what it is. Second of all, it sort of sets the scene for this study in terms of kendo is a pretty niche sport, and I'll say that a couple of times as we go through. So it's got some pretty limited resources. And this, I think, or I hope, sort of highlights the scope of what remote coaching can achieve. So I'll just hit play on this. Right now, hold on a sec. I wonder if I can. No, I can't. I didn't adjust the volume, but I'm not sure if this is going to be a little bit distracting. So I'll just get this out really quickly. It's a notoriously noisy sport and a really strange way to spend your Saturday mornings, as I'm sure you can appreciate. The ugly chap facing the camera is my older brother, and the good-looking fella on the other side, back to the camera, is yours truly. Kendo's, believe it or not, it's a sport that's got 2 million practitioners around the world, 1 million of those being in Japan, and that's epitomized by the fact that there's kendo in the school curriculum and also in the police curriculum for about a little bit more than a century now. So it's firmly entrenched in the Japanese culture, but not so much in New Zealand culture, with a comparatively short history of about 35 years. We've got 11 clubs in the country, about 2 or 3 coaches per club, and an active sort of participation pool of about 300 people. So I'll just play this for you now, and you can have a quick squeeze. Now, I appreciate it's probably a bit laggy, but it should give you an idea. I think that'll do. I didn't get that last shot off, unfortunately, but and my brother did trounce me pretty convincingly on that fight. So the overall sort of issues that we have in kendo in New Zealand is we've got low participation, we've got minimal media coverage, and this means that we don't get a lot of financial support, if any, at all. Okay, so as I've said, kendo is a minority sport, and it has really limited financial and human resources. So let's jump in. So a quick background on the project and how it emerged. Back in 2018, I was the coach of the national men's kendo team. Still am, for better or worse. And also I was the coach of a local or regional kendo club down in Christchurch, New Zealand, in the South Island. And in that club, there were 3 national team members or athletes training there. At that time, 2018, I was lucky enough to pick up a job at the University of Auckland, which was great for me, but not so much for the athletes. They were preparing for the World Championship event, and it's a bit of an unspoken law, I guess, in kendo circles, and it may be in other sports as well, where if you're at that high level, you tend to take on a coaching role. And so for the 3 athletes that I was working with at the time, that were in the team, me moving up to Auckland, moving away from the club, sort of put them in the position of coaching the rest of the club as well, in addition to doing their training for the World Champs. And that was quite a daunting prospect for them. And it also comes with the added, I guess, burden of having to fund their own trip away to the World Champs. So they had to work, they had to study, and they had to train, etc., etc. So there was, again, emphasizing that point of limited human resources. And so what we did was we sort of devised this, we did a lot of collaboration, a lot of discussion before I left to take on my new job. And we landed on this idea of the remote coach. And this is, like I said, pre-pandemic, back in early 2018. We didn't really know much about it. And as Chris said earlier, there was very little in the way of research done in this area. So we thought we were sort of on the cutting edge, as it were. But the point was for us that we wanted to do this project with user-friendly or commonly used technologies, and we wanted it to be easy and cheap for those reasons. So again, as it's there's not much money to be thrown around. Those were really important goals for us to underpin the project. How could we continue to access coaching or human resources in an easy and cheap way? So in terms of how everything was set up, it was actually pretty straightforward. With the hardware, we had laptops with webcams at either end. I had one in my office in Auckland. They had one down in their training hall or in the dojo in Christchurch. We initially tried a few different setups with multiple cameras around the training hall, be it on cell phones or additional webcams. We also dabbled with projector screens so that the presence of each other would be much bigger, and so on and so forth. It just became too much hassle with the setup, if I'm honest. And again, going back to those goals of being simple and cheap so that it would be sustainable. So we just stayed with the webcam and the laptop setup. In terms of software, we tried a lot of different apps that were available to us: Facebook Messenger, Line, Zoom, Teams, Skype, the whole lot. I'm a pretty avid Google user, so I tended to lean towards Google Hangouts. And those who don't know what that is, it's essentially like Facebook Messenger. Has video capabilities, chat, text, etc. And as another Google plugin, we landed on Screencastify. Now, Screencastify is simply a screen capture plugin. And this was really important for when we were running the trainings, and I'll explain this in the next slide a little bit more detail. basically capturing what was being recorded so that we could play that back and review it at the end of training. And so again, we had these really sort of basic technological ICT tools that we were using, in addition to paper-based, the old traditional training journals. And as I'll go over in the next slide as well, these were really important for the effectiveness of the project overall. So this is how training unfolded. It was really much pretty much a step-by-step sort of a thing. Before training started, athletes would complete either individually or as a group the training journals, or the pre-training section of the training journals, where they would answer and reflect on what they were working on in the current moment, what strengths they were bringing to today's session, and being very clear on the feedback that they wanted from me as their digital coach or their remote coach. So those three things were really the key questions that we had them reflecting on. And those would inform the conversations before we started, very similar to this setup now. And I would turn my focus to those areas that they wanted me to focus on. That's what I would really hone in on, and being specific on that feedback for those areas. The athletes would then begin the training, and this sort of lent itself well to what we were doing. We started doing modified games. Now, typically in a martial art, those of you who are familiar with the martial arts would know that it can be very repetitive, very drill based, and largely coach led. And I never liked that. It never sit well with me. So when I was working face to face with these athletes, we shifted into modified games and constraints and things quite a lot earlier. So this transition for us online, it wasn't terribly difficult for them to change their training menu or maintain what they were doing in the face to face sessions. And so essentially we would alter things like the space that they had to move around in, the time on the score, on the clock, the score on the scoreboard, and that would adjust the way that they would fight, either to gain a point or to protect a point, so that they would alter their strategy accordingly. And one of the things that that was quite cool about this was that we would have them play out a scenario using those constraints, and then when a point was scored or lost, we would push pause, so to speak. The athletes would stop, they would replay what had just happened and discuss what the alternatives might be. So for example, if someone lost a point, they would push pause at that moment in person. They would discuss how they lost that point or how they set that point up. And then they would replay an alternative scenario where it would play out for the advantage for the other person. So we would really getting this high level discussion in person, and sort of role playing this pause, replay sort of thing like you would in a digital setting anyway. From there, I would be frantically making timestamps on the Screencastify app, so that when we would review the footage later, I could supplement the conversations that the athletes had with my feedback, again going specifically to what they were after in their training journals. And then to wrap up the training, the athletes would then go through back into their training journals and say what they learnt today and what they were going to bring into this to the next session. So it kind of closed the loop. And as I said, we've got this blend of digital technologies where we're reviewing the footage immediately after, but we're going into the old-fashioned paper-based stuff as well to really get them sort of thinking specifically about what they're taking out of the training and what they're bringing into the next training. So there was quite a lot of high-level discussion throughout, and the point that I really want to drive home on this slide is that this was really important. My ability to move around the training hall and provide feedback or ask questions or whatever the case may be was naturally limited by me being on the other end of a laptop. So we had to lean on these high-level discussions between the athletes and then later with me at the end of training so that we could promote learning, because I wasn't able to do that one-on-one, particularly because kendo is so noisy. Everybody had to stop and do that. So that becomes an implication that I'll talk about in the next slide. So last slide, and I haven't covered very much in terms of the methodology for this study, but if you are interested, please have a look at these QR codes. One is my reflections in a self-study on what I deemed as successes and challenges, setup and so on of the project. And the second study that came out of this project was a phenomenographic look at what the athletes felt as being coached by a remote coach, which I think is a really important perspective. Now, let me just run through really quickly the strengths and the challenges we found from both of these studies. And the first one is around our ability to adapt to the circumstances. And so, as I said really earlier on, these athletes were under a lot of pressure to prepare for a world championship event and run trainings and work and study and so on and so on. And so we were able to adapt and keep things simple, keep them cheap, and keep them feeling good about their preparation for the world champs. And also, as a couple of the other presenters have mentioned, we were able to keep this connection and this rapport between us, even though we weren't physically in the room together. And obviously, as we all know, having that rapport, having that trust between the coach and the athletes is really important leading up to an event like that, but also at the event as well. So we were able to maintain that through the digital connection, which I think was great. And as I've said, we've been able to offset some of the limitations that Kendo has with financial and human resources, or limitations of those things, which means that we sort of proved a concept moving forward for future campaigns, albeit COVID sort of put the kibosh on that for now. And also, as I draw out of the phenomenographic study, the athletes were really happy with it. They were really relieved that they could have some guidance during their preparation with any sort of coaching expertise from their perspective. I'm not saying I'm an expert. And they also found that having somebody there, they called it the watching eye in a Foucauldian sense, to sort of push them along when trainings were tough. All right, so they didn't really feel they could slack off because there was a coach in the room with them regardless, which I thought was interesting. And then to the challenges, probably pretty self-explanatory. Sometimes the free tech that we were using wasn't always on point. Sometimes the screen would freeze, sometimes the Wi-Fi would drop out. But again, as we were trying to do this cheaply and easily, the athletes accepted that this might happen from time to time. And I touched on this just a little bit before. This idea of time on task was impacted. And what that means is, because Kendo is really noisy, because I'm limited in my movements around the training hall, when we had discussions, everybody had to stop. And that was a real limitation, especially during the winters, people got cold and so on. So we had to be on point with our conversations, or at least I did. I had to be on point with my time stamps when we would review the footage that was captured. And it just meant that I had to get sharper overall. I prefer to do one-on-one questioning and feedback with athletes. It wasn't possible with the digital coach approach, at least the way that we set it up. And so that put an emphasis on the athletes communicating with each other as much as possible, as I said, during those role play modified games. So I think that was a really good outcome. Despite it being a limitation, time on task, it meant that I had to change the way that I perceive the coaching role, my coaching role, and put a heck of a lot more emphasis on the athletes communicating with each other and unpacking the problems that they were facing. And as a side note, in some of the other studies that are being submitted to the special edition, we're starting to see similar patterns as well. High performance athletes tend to take on a more active role in working through the knowledge when they're given this remote coaching context to work in. Less access to the coach, more access to each other, perhaps. Not sure. So please do keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that resonates with you. If you've got any questions, please yell out. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Blake. We've only actually got 5 minutes left for any discussion with the panel. I don't think there's any questions at the moment. I did have one to actually bring this back to Chris Cushion at the start. So Chris, your very first slide was about the review you did in 2019, and
Yes,
you made a point, and you made the point about very little evidence. There's a very little evidence base, and we've had three presentations there based on research and practice. And I wonder if there's anything you'd picked out that you think is pertinent that would add to that review.
Well, all the research that's done in coaching will add to the knowledge base. I mean, I really encourage these guys to write this stuff up and get it out there so it can be included in future reviews. So, and I think it talks to, you know, the points around the review, really around it, about the technology not being the silver bullet, about pedagogical design and really being thoughtful about how you construct the environment that you're working in. So I think they're following the recommendations of the review, if you will, and it's great that we can get more information. And an unwitting, an unintended consequence of the pandemic arguably will be more research around how people have done this. So hopefully that will boost the research and give us a little bit more of a knowledge base to work on.
So potential another review in a couple of years' time, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it was UK coaching. I did a review for UK coaching in 2010 around learning, and they came back to me and said, "Can you do something around technology enhanced learning?" And so yes, so if there's a desire to do it, we'll do it again. Absolutely.
And maybe just to wrap up, then maybe finish off by asking each of the panelists maybe one message that if we went back to let's say we went back to the start of the pandemic and you were talking to a group of coaches about having to go online with their practice, maybe what would be one key message you've learned from either your research or your practice that you'd share with this group of coaches who had to go and work in a very new environment? Maybe start with you, Chris, first, because you're on, and then I'll pass to the other panelists. What would be the one key thing to tell a group of novice coaches who'd never worked in online before?
Yeah, I think it's come through my presentation and through the answers here, is to not worry so much about content, but really think about the design of the learning. That would be my, really think about what you're trying to get out from this and align stuff, and then how the technology can serve that. That would be my advice.
Perfect. Chris says that. Oh, sorry.
And don't panic.
Chris says that. What would be your one bit of advice that you learned from speaking to all those sailing coaches?
I was going to say something very similar, because there was something that I was going to I was trying to ask, because there was I think, Chris, you're mentioning there was a lot of emphasis on content with a lot of the technology used, and then when Sergio came in, he said, well, it's almost like you need to learn a different skill. And I think we're so it's so easy for us to use online environments for content, but it's not easy for us to use online environments as a pedagogical tool. And I think often we're shying away from that because it is difficult, but it's a new skill that we need to learn, and we make mistakes using them. And I was so encouraged with Sergio saying, it's difficult. What you think is easy is difficult, but you have to have a go at it, and then you reap the rewards. So I would probably say that don't shy away from using it, and have a go at it. And we all doing it. We all make mistakes, and I think that's okay. That's okay, and I think and it's still good.
So go for it and don't make mistakes. Sergio, over to you. Last word on one piece of advice.
Well, I'm going to actually, rather than talking about what I talked about before in terms of as a coach developer, I'm going to talk as a coach, having done a lot of coaching online during the pandemic. Probably that the relationship is even more important. Building the relationship is even more important than when you're face to face, because you really have to take more time. The feedback that we got from the parents of the children we were coaching was always, they just want to be there because they want to see each other. Okay, and they want to spend time together. So the content was actually not that important to them. And this is in the middle of a pandemic. Okay, if it was a regular thing that we did all the time, it might be different. But that even though you're online, the building of the rapport and the relationship is as important, if not more, than in regular coaching. That would be my main point.
Perfect. Thank you. And finally, Blake.
Yeah, I think it sort of extends on the previous three. For me, in my context, I think the most important thing about the success of the project was the collaboration. So working with the athletes to decide what structure is going to work with them or for them, so that you can build that relationship, so that you can hit those learning principles that have been talked about. So it was, to be clear, I was working in a high performance context, and it might not be appropriate with younger children or younger athletes, but certainly when we start to work with high performance athletes that know what they need, perhaps a little bit more mature, collaborating with the design, I think, would be an incredibly effective way to go about it from a coaching point of view.
Thank you. So thanks for our speakers. Thanks for those of you who've stayed with us for the hour. That's our hour up. I hope those of you who've been with us who have learned something about coaching in online environments. Some of this research is coming out. Look out for the special issue next year. I can see some of the names. I think Chris says that you'll recognise a couple of the names in our guests who are actually planning to submit articles for us. So thanks all for joining us. I hope you got a lot out of that, and all the best with your online coaching in the future.